Hey, folks, here's a super chat from Brett Sessoms, and he had a question for my guest, Lord Duncan McNair. He said, is your guest aware of human rights abuses of Benito Mussolini inside and outside of Africa? And he had to get back to work, so we didn't get a chance to get to this earlier. So I just want to ask Lord Duncan McNair if he's familiar. I suspect he is with what happened in Eritrea and Ethiopia and also in Libya with the Italians, and for that matter, Albania, but especially in Africa, we've seen these abuses under Mussolini. Are you familiar with those human rights abuses? Is it a topic you ever discuss, Duncan?
Well, I have a family angle on that.
Well, here we go again. This is a deep-rooted topic for you.
Well, I haven't actually studied the Italian occupation of those countries, but while Emperor Haile Selassie was exiled to the UK, my grandfather, Sir Arnold McNair, was his legal advisor, and he was a frequent visitor to the farm that they had near Cambridge. So I've found that this actually resonates with a number of Ethiopian people that I've spoken to, it's always struck me as a rather sort of pathetic Me Too operation. The Italians creating a little empire for themselves. And I have no doubt that because they were cut from the same cloth as Hitler, that they were pretty brutal, pretty unpleasant, and not the nicest people to have as an imperial power in your country.
Well, I'd have to agree and echo with your comments. That seems pretty much exactly what the Italians, what they were trying to do as well. Oh, we're late to the game. We just formed the nation of Italy in the late 19th century, and we don't have a colonial empire. So here's our effort to get one. It really seemed that was the intent. There didn't seem any effort to help develop those territories or nations that they later became at all on the part of the Italians. And there were human rights abuses that took place, particularly in Ethiopia. We saw that. And of course, it's famous because I used to share with my students at the Army War College. I'd ask a question, a rhetorical question, but I can also put it out there for them to answer if they wanted. So which countries in Africa have never been colonized? And of course, invariably, they will say Liberia and Ethiopia, to which I say, actually, that's factually incorrect. And I get very stunned looks from a lot of my African students. They look at me like, huh? No, you're wrong, Colonel Wyatt. Liberia was never colonized, and neither was Ethiopia. And I say, well, in the case of Liberia, in fact, it was colonized by former American free blacks and former slaves who settled there and imposed an alien political system based on the American political system, which was not known to the indigenous population. That is the very definition of colonization. They colonized there. They imposed a foreign system of governance on a people and subjected them to it. So that's exactly, so they were colonized. And when
it doesn't actually matter that they were black rather than white.
Exactly right. And that's the people have this view in their mind because of recent history, the past 2 centuries, that colonization is white Northern Europeans colonize. No, that's not it at all. That's just one of the most recent instantiations of colonization in the modern era. But the history of the world is full of colonization. I mean, we spread all over the planet, colonizing the planet. And when you impose a political system and your belief system on an indigenous population, whatever that is, then you've colonized them. And so when I explain it like that, like, oh, I get your point. I see they were. And then, but you're wrong, Colonel. What about Ethiopia? And I said, no. In the case of Ethiopia, the Italians invaded and they got their hat handed to them. And then they came back and they invaded the Second World War under Mussolini. And for a short period of 5 years, they controlled Addis Ababa and its environs and other parts of Ethiopia. And they imposed their own political order on the inhabitants of that area. That, in fact, is colonization. Now, the Ethiopians are very proud people, as you know, and they don't like hearing that. They're very independent. They got their own calendar. They tell time, their own schedule. They really do. And their own history, their own version of Christianity. It's among other religions. And they're very independent. If you call Ethiopians Black Africans, they look at you with a skewed eye. We're not Black, we're Ethiopian. It's a very independent group of people. When you tell them they were colonized, they don't want to hear that. So I never win that argument with Ethiopians, but I can win it on the merits with others. And I tell them, I said, the only country that actually was never colonized in Africa, it's a modern country today, would be Botswana. And like, no, the Brits no. The Dikosi, the chiefs from the Tswana peoples, approached the British and said, listen, these are my words, not their words. Obviously they said this in the 19th century. Listen, we're getting a little tired of these trek boards, these Afrikaners coming in and encroaching on our lands. And we would really like for someone to help us with this. And the Brits, of course, wanting an empire from Cape Town to Cairo are like, yeah, well, how about a protectorate? We'll ensure your security. And then they formed the Protectorate of Bechuanaland. And they didn't even administer it from Bechuanaland. It was administered from Mafeking in South Africa. That's how little it mattered. So the political development of the people in Botswana continued with the traditional chief system, the Kosi, the Dikosi, the plural, and then the Indabas they had to discuss events and jurisprudence. That all continued. Traditional leadership and political systems existed. There was a veneer of administrative control over the protectorate by the Brits, but they really didn't impose any real administration over it. And so when independence came in 1966, the founding of Botswana, that system existed. And it's one of the reasons why there were sufficiently strong political figures who could enter politics and govern the country legitimately. Anyway, so I always tell people the only country never colonized was Botswana.
But there is an interesting backstory or side story to that.
Is this the Seretse Khama story?
Yes.
And Ruth Williams, go ahead.
Yeah, well, yes. I mean, you know it better than I do, but Seretse Khama was the king of Botswana, the traditional king of Bechuanaland, in the 1940s and 50s, and he married a white woman called Ruth Williams, and but he married her in the UK. He was actually in the UK, and the British government was about as keen on Black African royalty marrying white women at that time as they were about Iranian governments nationalizing British oil assets. And so they actually refused to let him return and rule the country that he was legally entitled to rule. And the foreign I'm not sure he wasn't the foreign minister. I think he was a junior minister at the Foreign Office, was a gentleman called Patrick Gordon Walker. And he was the one that took that decision. Now, fast forward 20 years, and he's no longer a minister, but he is standing for his constituency, which he, as a member of parliament, in one of the elections when Harold Wilson was the prime minister or had been the prime minister, and there was a fund. I'm not going to sort of relay what they were saying, but there were fundamentally racist flyers being put out by the Conservatives, it went against all expectations that Patrick Gordon Walker lost his seat, and I can't rember. It was Peter somebody who was the MP, but Harold Wilson famously said that he would live out his life as a parliamentary leper. But it did strike me as an example of karma, not Seretse karma, but the Oriental concept of karma.
Karma.
That karma, yes, that Patrick Gordon Walker had taken this very racist decision, and then in popular parlance, it came back years later and bit him on the bum.
No doubt about that. That's true. Well, as you mentioned, Seretse Khama was the traditional chief of the Bangwenwato people who live in Botswana, one of the many Setswana or Tswana-speaking tribes that are in South Africa and Botswana. And in fact, they did want him. The South African government intervened with the British and tried to stop this from happening, let him come back in the country. And they were successful for a period of time until, as you mentioned, someone intervened and made a difference there. It is a fascinating history, but of course, his son, Ian Khama, became commander of the Defense Force and then eventually president of Botswana. And he is also traditional chief of the Bangwenwato people, but he has no offspring, at least that we're aware of. So we don't know what's going to happen after him.
Well, there is actually another bit of history in Botswana, and that is the fate of the San people, the Bushmen of the Kalahari, mm-hmm. Who were immortalized in the books of Lawrence van der Post. Mm-hmm. and they have a, I mean, they have a very traditional way of life, and I fear that their numbers are dwindling.
Well, in fact, let's hold that topic for our future discussion. We can talk, and of course, that won't be very popular in Botswana because the Botswana Democratic Party doesn't like criticism of its paternalistic approach to the as they call them Basarwa people. That's not the most complimentary term, but the Bushmen or the San peoples of Botswana. That's a topic we can talk about, and what's happened to Central Kalahari Game Reserve with them being relocated and the horrific things that happen as a consequence: alcoholism, teen pregnancy, short livelihoods, that sort of thing. But I think that's a great fruitful topic to discuss: indigenous peoples and human rights. I think we talk about their future. But listen, Lord Duncan McNair, I want to thank you once again for taking the time to answer the question about Ethiopia and Benito Mussolini and human rights abuses, and also the little directional soliloquy we had here, heading off another one talking about countries that were colonized and not colonized in Africa. I enjoyed that. Thank you for your time, and we'll catch you here on the program again sometime. Appreciate it.
Look forward to it, Chris. Thanks very much.